Again, welcome back to Introduction to Swift. This is class number 8, and we will be talking about UIKit today, okay? So I'm going to scroll down to the syllabus, and you'll see here we are in class 8, and we're going to introduce UIKit. So in the last class, we talked about Swift UI, and then we worked a little bit on Swift UI, and we made a small project with that, and then we started a tutorial working on a UIKit based project, right? Let's dig in, now that you've probably used UIKit a little bit, let's dig into UIKit and see what's there and what's different from Swift UI, right? So I'm going to click on UIKit lesson here, and let's see what we have, right? I'm going to go to the slides link. And again, the slides are really just the lesson. So if you want to read the lesson, you can just read that other page. It has all the same information on it. Okay, so today's agenda is, we're going to talk about UIKit, scenes, views, and view controllers, view lifecycle methods, and wireframes, and then we have a tutorial project. And we started that last week, so you can continue working on it. Today's learning objectives are identify common problems and elements in iOS apps, understand the relationship between scenes, views, and view controllers, and describe the concept of MVC. Okay, and you've probably used MVC in other places. MVC is a common software pattern that's used in a lot of frameworks and languages. And then also be able to use and describe auto layout. Okay, so this is updated for iOS and iOS 14 and Xcode 12, right? So UIKit is current. It's the old guard. It's been around for a long time, and it's still in use, right? So what is UIKit? So UIKit is the core framework, right, that's built into, or provided by Apple for building iOS apps, okay? It includes all of the core default components that you see in all the apps. So you see buttons, sliders, image views, date pickers, table views, I don't know what else. Like, there's a whole bunch. Input elements, text inputs and things like that, right? If you notice, like, a lot of those look the same from one app to the next, and that's because they're provided by UIKit. And so anybody building an app can just pull those tools out. That's why the checkbox doesn't really look like a checkbox on your phone. It looks like a little sliding button, right? Because that's what the UIKit element looks like, right? Okay, and what's great about this is it provides some base functionality, so you don't have to worry about coding a button or a slider or an image. Instead, you can just use the built-in UIKit, right, item, right? And behind that, there's a bunch of things that are invisible that you don't see, and these are scenes and view controllers and views, okay? So whenever we build a scene, we create a view controller for it to control the view, and then that scene is a view itself, and that view contains other views, right? So actually the button, the slider, the image view, anything you see on the screen is actually a subclass of UI view, right? So it's all views. And actually a lot of those are all built on the MVC paradigm, so they actually have their own model and their own controller, right? And then we just build that into our project. So what's great about this is UIKit gives us a way to create a consistent appearance across all of our apps. So that way, if someone uses one app and then they switch to another one, it feels the same. It doesn't feel like a totally new experience, right? So they can just get in and start working, and they're not confused, right? And that's the experience that we want people to have, right? So UIKit's elements are flexible and familiar, so they work. Apple's been updating them and improving them since iOS was invented like 10 years ago. So they're all pretty solid. We can trust that they work well. They're also familiar to all of our users, right? And they automatically update when there's a system update. So if something happens on the system where Apple changes the look of the user interface, if we're using any of the default components, then they update from the system. So that's why we can also style things so it looks like the system style. So we can borrow from the system styles, and our apps look like all the other apps that are there, right? if we're using the UIKit stuff. Now we could write our own code to draw our own buttons and elements and things like that, but that's, that might be useful in some cases, but most of the time we want to use the built-in user interface elements, right? Okay, so let's talk about how an app is made. Okay, so first of all, you got to decide like what can your app do, right? And what things are happening and in what scenes. So you might have an app and it just has one screen, like the calculator. So then we know we have one scene. We call it the buttons or the calculator scene, right? But some apps will have multiple scenes, and you'll have to decide what goes on in each of those scenes. And you'll also have to decide how you can transition from one scene to the next. Like, how do I get from one scene to the other? And is it possible to go from one scene to another scene? Like, it may not be possible to go directly. You might have to go from scene A to B before you can get to C. So a scene consists of view controllers and views. So scene is kind of a word. There isn't really like a UI scene, but there is a UI view controller and a UI view. Okay, and a scene is kind of both of those, right? So a view controller is the code that goes behind the scene, and it's like the business logic. It's kind of like our observable class in the calculator when we were using Swift UI, right? And so the view controller holds the data and keeps track of what's going on. It handles taps on buttons, sends messages to load data and things like that, okay? Every scene has a root view, okay? And that view is what we actually see in the app, right? So a view controller owns a view. Usually it has at least one view, right? It might have more views, but usually it's got one view, and that view is what we're going to see on the screen, right? You can add more sub views if you like to the root view. But the view is something that we see. It's the thing we see. Behind that, though, there's a lot of code that we don't see, right? And that's in the view controller, okay? The view controller is also there to manage views, right? So that, like, if you tap on something and a picture pops up or something happens, your view controller is probably responsible for that, right? But then the picture itself is a view, right? Okay, and the view controller will also get information from system events, like when you rotate the phone or if a phone call comes in or something like that, right? And then you can handle what's going to happen in your app when it gets interrupted by some event. Okay, so let's talk about views. So a view is anything that can be displayed on the screen, okay? And they all share common properties. They have a size, a position, right? They can perceive user input, so you can tap on a view, okay? In UIKit, all of the user interface elements that you see are built upon a class called UIView, right? So all of those elements are views. So button is a view, text field is a view, date picker is a view, image view. There's a text input view. I can't remember them all. There's a whole bunch, right? So all of those are built on top of UIView, right? And every view has a life cycle. So the life cycle is like what happens over the cycle of the existence of the view, right? So, and it goes through stages. So if you think about, like plants in your garden, they go through a life cycle of being a seed, and they sprout and they grow, and then maybe someone picks them and cooks them in their dinner or whatever. I don't know, a bird eats them or a gopher eats them or something, right? Okay, so one of the well, actually, in a view, there's a method called ViewDidLoad, right? So this is called when the view is loaded for the first time, right? And here's where you might initialize properties and set up the situation for your view, right? Like whatever, arrange elements on the screen, and do some other things, right? And then there's view will appear and view did appear. So view did load happens when the view is loaded, and views are actually loaded from storyboard. So when you are using storyboard in Xcode to draw your views with UIKit, right, it's actually saving that data to a separate file. And when your app loads up, it actually looks for the view data in those files and it can load that data, right? when the view is going to appear on the screen, right, we're going to get a message called view will appear and view did appear. So view will appear happens right before that we see the view, right? And view did appear happens right after the view appears on the screen. So these can be useful for a situation where maybe we have an animated transition or we want to animate some elements on the screen. So when view will appear pops up, we can arrange the elements at their starting location. And when view did appear gets called, we can start the elements animating to the position where we want to see them, right? So in other words, you might have like a message that's at the top of the screen, but in view will appear, we might move it up off the top edge out of sight. And on view did appear, we might say, okay, now move down into view, right? So slide down the screen until we can see it, right? Okay. So this is also a good place to load some data maybe. And then there's view will disappear and view did disappear. Now, there's something to note here, right? With view will appear and view did appear against view did load. So view did load is going to happen one time, but it's possible like when we load a view and see it the first time that we actually switch to a new view and then come back to this view. And that doesn't necessarily mean that this view is going to load again. So it'll get the message that it loaded the first time, but then when we put it away, kind of like the screen here. So I loaded this view maybe for the first time here, and then when it goes away, we didn't actually lose it. It may not load again, but it might get another view did appear or view will appear the second and third time that we view it. Okay? So quick, take a break. Go to the Apple Docs and read through here. So take a few minutes. Click on this link. I'm going to open it up right here. I'll open it in a tab. And Apple provides a pretty good set of documentation, right? And they have a whole section on user interface stuff, right? They have a whole section called the Human Interface Design Guidelines, right? And what this is they call it the HIG for short, H-I-G, right? So you can Google HIG, right? And you'll get Human Interface Guidelines, right? And this tells you how to use user interface elements, how they should be used. And, you know, it talks about a lot of things. It talks about your app architecture, talks about user interaction, system capabilities, really important stuff if you're going to design well-made apps, okay? So stop the video, take a few minutes, take 5-10 minutes, read through here and, you know, or just read through here till you're bored and then come back to the video. Okay, great. So I hope that the information in the Apple guideline is good to you or good for you. Remember, you can always go back to that and look at it again, especially if you're curious about something. So I'm curious about bars, right? So I can look at navigation bars, you know, and I can come back to the navigation bar section. Maybe if I'm looking for user interaction and I'm wondering about 3D touch, like I can go back to this section and read it again. So you know, feel free to always go back to the HIG, to the Human Interface Guidelines, and mine it for information for anything that you are currently working on. Okay, so let's move on now. Let's talk about building a wireframe. So here's another exercise I'd like you to do, right? So just imagine you're making an application for a hotel management program, okay? And think about the scenes that the app might need, okay? And then draw the elements that are needed in each scene. So maybe we need to be able to navigate between the scenes. We need to be able to add a manager. We need to be able to rent out a hotel room, right? So just draw a quick wireframe for that and then imagine like which elements you might use from what you saw here in the Human Interface Guidelines. Right? And then maybe also make some notes about transitions between scenes, right? How do you get from one scene to another? So take a couple minutes to do that. Okay, great. And so when you're, and you can stop the video if you didn't, right? But if you stop the video and you drew your wireframe, then continue now, okay? You know, you should share your designs. In class, we'll share with the people in class. You can find someone in class and share your design with, or if you're not in class, you can share with somebody else, right? And get some feedback from them, and then maybe modify your designs and you know, get some more feedback, right? That's a typical design process, right? So let's talk about building a screen with storyboard, right? So let's do that. I'm going to switch over to Xcode here, and I'm going to open up the Magic 8-Ball app. I did the tutorial also, so this is the tutorial that you're going to work on. I don't know why my tutorial is moving really slow here. You know, maybe I'll do this. Let me stop the video here, and then I'll do this in the next video, and I'll figure out why my Xcode is moving so slow. Okay, so thanks for watching.